Have you ever stood at the grave of the person you loved the most, only to discover the earth beneath your feet was a lie? That moment of collapse isn't from the grief of their absence, but from the seismic shock of the truth they buried alongside themselves. This isn't just a story. It's the autopsy of my life, performed in public view on the day of my husband's funeral. If you have ever been betrayed by a silence so profound it echoes for a lifetime, stay with me. The day of Arthur's funeral was the color of forgotten things. The sky wasn't just overcast. It was a leaden, oppressive dome that felt personally engineered to mirror the weight on my chest. It was the kind of gray that seeps into your soul, a constant, damp reminder of solitude even amidst a crowd. I arrived at the small, stone-clad church early. Far too early. I'd spent an age before my wardrobe, finally selecting a simple, knee-length black dress and a wide-brim hat with a veil. It felt like a costume. The grieving widow. That was my new, unwelcome title. For 25 years, I had been Alara Vance, Arthur's wife. Ours wasn't a life of glamour, no glittering charity galas or summers in the Mediterranean. It was a life built on quiet consistency, evenings reading side by side, holidays spent hiking in national parks, a modest home filled with books and the scent of his pipe tobacco. We never had children. I couldn't, and Arthur, my sweet, devoted Arthur, always said I was his entire world. He never made me feel less than whole. He also told me his work as a structural engineer required him to be on site for major projects, necessitating his absence for 6 months of every year. He worked out of state, he said. He loathed modern technology, preferring face-to-face meetings and handwritten notes. He called himself a dinosaur. I called him charming. I believed every word. When I stepped into the church that morning, the first wrong note sounded. The pews were already half full with people I had never seen before. I assumed they were colleagues from his long-distance projects, associates from a life he kept separate, but not secret. Or so I thought. But their demeanor was all wrong. The glances thrown my way weren't dipped in sympathy. They were sharp with curiosity, laced with something colder. Contempt. Then I saw her. A woman, my age, standing ramrod straight near the front pew. She was dressed in immaculate, severe black, her posture not broken by grief, but rigid with a fury that seemed to vibrate the air around her. Flanking her were 2 adults, a man in his early 30s with Arthur's strong jawline, and a woman a few years younger with his piercing blue eyes. They formed a united front, a family. And they all turned to look at me as I walked down the aisle. Their stares weren't just hostile, they were personally, vitriolically accusatory. I took my seat in the front row on the opposite side, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The service was a blur of somber music and platitudes about a man I clearly didn't know. The eulogy, given by a man I'd never met, spoke of Arthur's devotion to his family, his yearly tradition of building elaborate gingerbread houses at Christmas, his coaching of a little league team I'd never heard of. Each word was a splinter of ice driven into my heart. As the final prayer ended, I rose on unsteady legs, desperate for the sanctity of fresh air. That's when I heard it. A voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the murmured condolences. Unbelievable. She actually has the audacity to show up here. I froze. The sun was pointing directly at me, his face a mask of pure rage. His sister gripped his arm, hissing something in his ear, but the dam had broken. You ruined our family. You were nothing but his mistress, and now you have the gall to come here and play the grieving widow? Mistress. The word hit me with physical force. A wave of gasps and horrified whispers rippled through the crowd. I looked past him to the woman, his wife. Her eyes met mine. There was no confusion in them, only a deep, weary, and profound pain. She knew exactly who I was. I was a ghost in my own life. My lungs refused to work. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth, and blindly pushed my way through the gathered mourners, their stares burning into my skin. I burst out of the church, into the gray day, gulping air like a drowning woman, the world tilting on its axis. That night, I sat on the cold hardwood floor of our living room, still wearing my funeral clothes. The lights were off. I didn't cry. I was trapped in a suspended animation where time slowed to a crawl, and every memory I possessed began to curdle. Arthur had another wife, another family. The 6 months away each year, that was them. I wasn't the wife. I was the other woman, the secret, the lie. And the most devastating part, I had been a willing, happy participant in my own deception. The silence in our home, once so peaceful, now felt accusing. I wandered through the rooms like a stranger, touching objects that had once been touchstones of our love. His favorite armchair, the chess set we played on every Sunday, the faded photograph of us on our 20th anniversary in Maine. Now each item seemed to mock me. Had he called her from that very chair? Had he been thinking of his other children while I beat him at chess?
25 years, a quarter of a century of Christmases, birthdays, and quiet anniversaries. It had all been a meticulously staged play, and I was the only actor who didn't know she was reading from a script. While I was writing love notes and stocking the freezer with his favorite meals for his return, he was holding another woman's hand, reading bedtime stories to other children, living a louder, fuller life in another state. And yet, I had loved him. That was the knife twist. The love was real for me. The betrayal felt like it had sawed through bone and marrow, leaving me hollowed out. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. A text from Sarah, a friend I'd known since college. Saw what happened. I can't believe you knew about his family all this time. How could you? Don't contact me again. Knew. The word was a brand. The condemnation had begun. It accelerated with vicious speed. By midnight, I found myself falling down a rabbit hole of social media vitriol. Local community groups had posts from anonymous accounts. There were photos from the funeral, my face blurred but unmistakable. The mistress who had the nerve to wear black, one caption read. Another, she lived off his money while his real family struggled. Now she's probably waiting for the life insurance payout. My email inbox was a sewer of hate. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in decades, from complete strangers, called me a homewrecker, a gold digger, a sociopath who preyed on a vulnerable man. No one asked for my side. The narrative was set in stone. I was the cunning seductress, and the grieving widow, her name I would learn was Clara, was the saintly victim. I didn't sleep. I sat at our kitchen table staring at the grain of the wood until the sun rose, drinking tea that tasted of nothing. A pathetic, desperate part of my brain clung to a thread of hope, a misunderstanding, a terrible coincidence. Maybe Clara was an ex-wife he'd never mentioned. Maybe the children were from a previous marriage he'd hidden. But later that morning, fueled by a numb determination, I went into Arthur's home office, a room I had always respected as his private domain. I broke the lock on his filing cabinet with a fire poker. The truth was there, in black and white. Duplicate bank statements showed regular wire transfers to an account under the name Clara Rhodes. Flight manifests, every 6 months like clockwork to a city just 3 hours away. Lease agreements for a house in a suburb called Oak Haven. A second life insurance policy, receipts for family vacations to Disneyland, for orthodontist bills, for a diamond necklace purchased on a date that coincided with our wedding anniversary. Every lie was documented, notarized, and filed away with an engineer's precision. I wasn't just a widow, I was a fool. A woman in her 50s, publicly shamed, utterly alone, with no children to comfort her, no siblings to defend her, left only with the ghost of a man who loved me quietly while building a roaring public life with someone else. I started locking the doors. I jumped at the sound of the mail slot clattering. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me, whether real or imagined. Paranoia took root and bloomed in the shadows of my own home. I was a prisoner of someone else's secret. The day of the will reading was a trip to the gallows. I almost didn't go. What was the point? But a stubborn, bruised part of my soul needed to hear it. I needed to know if Arthur, in his final act, had offered me any acknowledgement, any sliver of an apology. The lawyer's office was cold and smelled of lemon polish and old paper. I was the last to arrive. Clara was there, her children flanking her like grim sentinels. They didn't look at me. I took a seat in the far corner, as small as I could make myself. The lawyer, a man with a tired voice and spectacles perched on his nose, read the document in a monotone. Arthur's estate was vast, far larger than I had ever imagined. Our modest lifestyle was a facade. There were multiple properties, stock portfolios, investment accounts worth millions. The lawyer listed bequests: the family home in Oak Haven to Clara, a generous trust fund for each of the children, Liam and Sophia. I braced myself, waiting for the token pitying mention, a small annuity perhaps to placate the secret girlfriend. Then came the clause that detonated the room. And to my wife, Ilara Vance, I leave the entirety of the remainder of my estate, including but not limited to the marital residence in Crestwood, all remaining investment portfolios, retirement accounts, and liquid assets, to be transferred to her sole ownership effective immediately. The air was sucked out of the room. For a second, there was just dead silence. Then Liam's chair screeched back. "You knew it, you scheming bitch. You knew all along. He'd never do this unless you manipulated him. You isolated him. You poisoned him against us." Sophia was crying now, tears of pure rage. "He was our father. You were just his whore. You don't deserve a penny of this." I tried to speak, to force the words I didn't know past my lips, but my throat had sealed shut. I looked at Clara. She wasn't yelling. She was just staring at me, and her expression was worse than anger. It was a hollow, devastating look of total defeat. In that moment, I saw my reflection. We were both his victims, but the world only saw one of us. I stumbled out of the office, the sound of their fury ringing in my ears. I was no longer just a widow. I was the thief who stole their inheritance. The following weeks were a special kind of hell. The local newspaper ran a story, "Secret Second Wife Inherits Fortune in Vance Will's Shock." My name wasn't used, but everyone knew. The sideways glances at the supermarket became outright cold shoulders. Neighbors I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Inside, the house was a museum of lies. I hired a lawyer, not to fight them, but to confirm the will was real. It was. Arthur had changed it a year ago, of sound mind and body. He knowingly lit this fuse. The harassment intensified. Liam emailed me directly, long, rambling, furious messages accusing me of elder abuse, of coercion, of being a cancerous leech. He threatened to sue, to go to the media, to destroy what was left of my life. Sophia waged a social media war, painting me as a calculating predator. Her followers sent me messages telling me to kill myself, that I was a blight on the earth.
The weight of their hatred, combined with the crushing weight of Arthur's betrayal, was immense. One night, I found the words liar spray painted in red across my garage door. I didn't clean it off for days. Part of me felt I deserved it. But on the fourth morning, watching the sun glint off the ugly red letters, something in me shifted. The shame wasn't mine to carry. Arthur had done this. He had built this cage, and I was done being his prisoner. My revenge would not be one of fire and rage. It would be one of ice and intention. I would not react. I would not crumble. I would reclaim my life, and I would use the very weapon he had left me, his money, to do it. I started quietly. I began transferring large, anonymous donations to women's shelters, to literacy programs, to organizations that helped victims of financial abuse. I established a scholarship fund in my own maiden name for women over 40 starting new lives. Each transaction felt like I was scrubbing his tainted money clean, cutting out the rot his deception had left on every dollar. Of course, they found out. Sophia posted screenshots of public grant filings. "The guilt money starts flowing," she wrote. "She thinks she can buy a clear conscience." Then the formal legal papers arrived. Liam and Sophia, with Clara listed as a co-plaintiff, were contesting the will. Their claims? Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and fraud. I met with my lawyer, a sharp, unflappable woman named Miriam Thorne. She said, "It's without merit. The paperwork is impeccable. His doctors have already provided affidavits attesting to his sound mind. We will win." "I know," I said, my voice calm. "A new sensation for me. I'm not going to fight them." Miriam blinked. "Alara, you have to. This is your livelihood." "No," I said, a plan crystallizing in my mind. "I'm going to settle, but on my terms." I needed to talk to Clara. Not through lawyers, not through screaming children. I found a cafe in a town neither of us lived in and sent her a carefully worded email. To my shock, she agreed. She was already there when I arrived, looking exhausted but composed. We didn't exchange pleasantries. "Did you love him?" she asked first, her voice low and steady. "Yes," I answered, truthfully. "I truly did." She nodded, a flicker of pain in her eyes. "He told me you were an old flame, someone he'd briefly see on his business trips for companionship. He made you sound pathetic. I felt sorry for you." The admission was a fresh wound. "He lied to us both," I said, "for 25 years. We weren't wives. We were schedules. We were compartments. He didn't have one great love. He had two half-lives, and he managed them perfectly." We spoke for an hour, two sides of the same ruined coin. I saw my own grief reflected in her face. The betrayal was identical. The loneliness, the shattered trust, the questioning of every single moment of the past quarter century. "I'm dropping my name from the lawsuit," she said finally. "My children, their anger comes from a place of hurt, but this inner fighting, it's what he's left us with. And I'm tired. I don't want the money to destroy us further. I want to make a proposal." I laid out my plan. I would not relinquish the entire estate. That would feel like admitting guilt I didn't possess. But I would create a substantial trust for Clara, ensuring her financial security for life. I would clear the mortgages on Liam and Sophia's homes. The remainder, a still significant sum, would be mine to steward as I saw fit. Clara looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time. "You're not what they said you were." "Neither are you," I replied. We parted not as friends, but as allies in a truce. The legal battle dissolved. The online vitriol from Liam and Sophia continued, but it lost its power without their mother's backing and the fuel of a public court battle. With the war over, I began my peace. I sold the house in Crestwood. Every room was a tomb.
I donated most of the furniture, purging the physical reminders of Arthur. I kept only what was truly mine. I moved to a small, light-filled cottage by the sea, in a community where no one knew my name or my story. I adopted a scruffy terrier mix from the shelter and named him Finn. I started volunteering at the local maritime museum, giving tours and losing myself in histories that weren't my own. The silence here was different. It was my own. It was peaceful. Months later, an envelope arrived with no return address. My heart clenched, expecting more hate. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of an old photograph, creased and faded. It showed Arthur, younger, laughing with a boy of about 5, Liam, on his shoulders. On the back, in a handwriting I didn't recognize, Clara's, was written, "For what it's worth, I believe you. I'm sorry. C." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't absolution, but it was a thread of connection. A year after that, I received another letter, this one from Liam. It was short, awkward, and stilted, but it contained an apology. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only the ash of regret. The final act of my revenge was a quiet one. I used the remainder of Arthur's money to establish the Alara Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting individuals who have experienced long-term financial and emotional deception. We offer legal aid, therapy, and resources to help people rebuild their lives. At the foundation's launch, a reporter asked me, "Is this your way of getting back at your late husband?" I smiled, a genuine, calm smile that felt foreign on my face just a year before. "No," I said. "This is my way of ensuring that the aftermath of his lies produces something good, something honest. This isn't about him anymore. It's about me. It's about who I chose to become after the world fell apart." I had taken the inheritance of ashes he left me, and I had planted a garden. The revenge was not in hurting those he loved, but in healing myself and others from the damage he had done. I had taken his double life and forged from it a single, solid, truthful one of my own. And in the quiet solitude of my cottage by the sea, with the sound of the waves as my constant companion, I was finally, truly free.